It's funny, you think you've got loads of space for plumbing and then, well, turns out you haven't. Welcome back to the final episode of the van build. Well, hello, and welcome to the last episode of my van build series. This is kind of the end of the main build. There's a couple of things today to talk about. First one, of course, is the bathroom, just how that's built in general, some of the small pieces there and how it was constructed. The shower pan, especially, as you'll see, was a decent amount of work. And then also just going over some of the small changes to the van. This video, at the time of recording, I've been on 2 trips with the van, kind of test single night trips. And I'll talk about some of the things I found on those trips and some of the small fixes I've done and changes I've made and the start of that iteration process I keep talking about in all these videos of making the van slowly better over time. So let's start with the bathroom. Now, obviously I've talked in a previous episode about plumbing and all the things involved there, so I don't want to go into super amazing amounts of depth about how the plumbing works, but I'll give you a quick recap and I'll throw in a few overlays and video clips from various pieces there. So if you recall, if you've seen the episode, the plumbing in the van all comes from a single main freshwater tank. I think it's 36 US gallons roughly, and that sits over the passenger side rear wheel well behind this kind of propane tank here, back a little bit. That tank then goes into a pump and filter system. The pump is your standard kind of RV pressure activated pump, and that then feeds into both the cold water trunk main into the rest of the van, and then also goes into a hot water heater that's electrically powered. The hot water heater then feeds into a mixing valve. The mixing valve takes the very hot scalding level hot water out of the boiler and then cold water from the cold water lines, mix them together to be a nice lukewarm water, and then sends that out into the main hot water system. The point there, of course, is it's quite a small hot water boiler. It can't do more than, I think, 2 or 3 liters. But crucially, if you set the boiler temperature really high and then mix it down with cold water, you get a lot more warm water for your money out of that heater. So that's why that's done like that. So that's kind of the system that you see would be behind this sort of back section here in the rear of the van. It's all kind of tucked away behind this propane tank here. From there, you have your standard, PEX piping, hot and cold water through to the rest of the van. Now, last time I showed you, the kitchen was plumbed in. That is still working great, no problems there. And the shower at that point was just kind of 2 PEX pipes were run to where the shower is and then just terminated. So most of my build since then has been both making the actual shower itself, so obviously the physical surround and the walls and the flooring and the waterproofing, as well as the actual shower and the taps or faucet itself. But also there's a crucial thing I hadn't done last time, and that was the wastewater. Last time, you may remember if you've seen the video, the sink drained into a friendly bucket that sat below the sink. That was my entire Greywater solution. This time it has an actual Greywater tank. In fact, there's 2 of them. There's 1 on each side of the van. And so that's kind of been the other big piece of work. In fact, I did that first before I built the shower. So what I'm going to do, I would take the camera and crawl underneath the van with you. Recording in those conditions is a bit tricky, so instead I'm going to talk over some video I shot earlier of what's underneath there so you can see it. So first of all, there is, as I said, 2 Greywater tanks. There is a smaller one on the passenger side that feeds basically down directly from the sink into that tank. That tank is 6 US gallons. It's not super huge, but crucially, and there's a reason both these tanks, they're not as big as they could be, but they're designed to sit up inside the sort of underside of the van. They don't protrude down out of the bottom any lower than any of the van's sort of lower edges on the side. I wanted to keep a little bit of that sort of ground clearance. I do intend to take the van on some somewhat rough dirt roads. That's why it's an all-wheel drive model. So I wanted to keep that ground clearance in there. So this side is a 6 US gallon Greywater tank plumbed directly into the sink with a standard kind of S-bend trap under there. It's all your American standard 1 1/4 inch, I think it's polypropylene. It's the standard like white twisted together stuff. On the shower side, there is I think it's an 11 US gallon Greywater tank, again, under the body, basically directly under the shower. Again, pretty similar, all standard plumbing. The main difference there is there's not enough room under the shower to have an S or a U-bend or any other kind of trap that would stop the smells coming up that, you know, takes vertical space. So instead I've got a small slimline sort of inline trap that, rather than using sort of the standing water model in the S or the U shape, instead has sort of a rubber membrane that has like open and closes as a one-way valve. So that's just in there under the shower pan. As you'll see, we go and look inside the shower pan. I show you the construction videos. The whole shower pan is about, I think, 10 or 11 centimeters. So, you know, like 3 or so inches off the ground. That does reduce the headspace in there, but it lets me run that plumbing inside the van so it won't freeze if the van's somewhere very cold overnight, like it is here about 4 months out of the year. So that's kind of the Greywater plumbing. Wasn't too difficult for sort of removing the water. On the smaller one, I've just got a little valve I can open and close. And on the big one, I've got more of the American RV standard sort of, it's like a 3 or 4 inch twist valve with a smaller one on it. I intend to empty both of these manually. I'm not the kind of person who's going to take this and park up in an RV park and have like built-in plumbing. So they're more meant to be empty either onto the ground if you're somewhere where you can do that and you've used biodegradable soaps, etc., or into a sort of container bucket or container, and then just take it and empty it somewhere useful. For example, in the last couple of trips, I have kept all the water in the tanks while out in the country, and then just emptied them when I get back here, basically to the shop, because I know I can do it safely here. So that's Greywater. It's not particularly complicated. It was kind of a pain getting them strapped up underneath the van. I have used that sort of metal pipe strapping under there with some padding and stuff. It's not going to be great long term, I suspect. I'm probably going to work on making a more rigid, permanent frame, but it is at least secured directly to the vehicle frame using rib nuts and bolts. It feels pretty secure, and it has survived 2 trips, one of them with pretty rough roads, so it's doing all right so far. The final thing there is I did build both of the tanks. You need to have an air vent on them, so obviously, like, as the water comes in, the air can escape. They will both overflow out of the bottom of the van in case they get too full up. My choice was either they overflow outside or they overflow inside, and while I don't want to dump grey water where I shouldn't, it's still better than having it inside the van and ruining everything. So there is a failure mode choice there, which is to have them fail outside the van. There is, of course, no black water tank. If you've seen previous episodes, you'll remember me talking about my composting toilet. So all of the human waste comes out as compost or in a liquid urine bottle. We'll talk about that in the bathroom in a bit. So there's no like icky black water to go and take what I've heard is called the stinky slinky down into an RV dump station. So that whole thing is avoided, which is nice. I mean, the compost is still not perfect, but it's a bit easier to handle, and crucially, you can dump it in significantly more places once it's composted. So that's kind of the plumbing update and the Greywater update. That was, you know, a decent amount of work, but I think most of the work was the construction of the shower pan. So let's go inside and look at the actual shower, and then I'll show you some of the video of its construction and talk about some of those bits. So let's head in. So here we are inside the van, and of course the shower is the star of today's show. Now, my initial plan for the shower had a solid wall here, so a wall sort of this half here, and then a door here that would either be slidey or swing out. I've actually dropped that for now in favor of this shower curtain. There's 2 reasons for that. One, this is way easier. You just buy the appropriate shower pole and pop it in and buy a curtain. I did sew this to be the right length, but that was like 10 minutes of sewing. It wasn't too bad. The second reason is you get a lot more space. One of the problems with this particular shower is I've made the aisle in the center of the van quite large compared to most designs, and so the shower width is a lot narrower than you might see otherwise. And what this does is, rather than having a solid wall here that you'd like hit your elbows on, it gives you a bit of room with the curtain, it's fabric, it moves out, to have a shower and a bit more privacy in here, rather than just having to have a wall here and like squeeze and shower like this. Of course, the curtain is mostly to keep the water inside rather than actual privacy, but it is at least somewhat opaque, so there is some semblance if there are 2 of you in the van. That's kind of the basic structure of that. It's still kind of the same shape, so you've got your 3 walls here. These walls and this ceiling are all FRP, fiber reinforced paneling, fiberglass I should say. It is basically, from what I can tell, fiberglass and some plastic. It is, you know, used, I've seen a lot in the US at least, for, like, you know, the bathroom here in the workshop has this stuff on the walls. So I got one that has these sort of faux tile pattern in it. I cut it up to the right size. Now, one thing to note is it is fiberglass. You've got to be real careful when cutting this up, because has those nasty fibers you don't want to do. So I cut this with proper ventilation and wearing a respirator just to be doubly sure, though I'd hope a few panels wouldn't be the total end of the world. But still want to be careful. And then of course, you can kind of see this on the video here. This back wall is curved. You get much more room at the bottom than you do at the top. So the back wall here is the only straight cut, because the actual FRP is quite bendy. It's one of the nice things about it. And then these two side wall panels are kind of cut with a curve. You can kind of see it here to match the curve of that back wall. So it all kind of fits together in the end. Now, of course, they don't meet precisely because it's not possible to measure it precisely and it's all moving a little bit. And so I've then got this waterproof quarter round trim. This basically covers up all the edges and gaps inside the shower. And then finally, I've put some white silicone caulking down all the seams here and along the seams here, just to really make it properly waterproof, and it also hides some of the little bits of stuff you can still see. So the walls weren't too bad. You see there's a single light in here, just embedded in the top ceiling surface. It's like all the other lights in the van. It's a standard 12 volt little thing that you pop into a hole. So, you know, hole saw, cut the hole out, and in you go. Then we move to the actual shower. So you may recall, if you've seen this in any previous episodes, of this wall, there were two PEX pipes running up here, a hot and a cold. Hot on the left, of course, is the US standard. Those now terminate in a pair of 90-degree joints that come with little holes to screw to stuff in the wall here. So those are fastened to the aluminium framing now to make it a bit more rigid. Like, there is actually a decent amount of structural support behind this shower thing. And then it comes out of the wall and then goes onto the shower control sort of valve / tap here. And then I deliberately chose one that has the output on the outside. So most of the ones in houses in the US, you have this and it goes back inside, and then the pipe goes up the wall and the pipe comes out here. I wanted one on the outside because I want the flexibility, and because there is a structural component here I can't run a pipe through. So both for utility inside and outside the wall. Other than that though, this does all kind of work. Shower wise, there is one slight issue, as you can see here. The escutcheons, the sort of little silver rings that hide the shower seam to the wall, don't fit here because my wall is a lot narrower than a standard American wall, and so the little elbows pop out a bit more. So for now, I've at least secured it off with some wall plates and made it waterproof. There's still a visible gap. I'm going to make some longer escutcheons to cover the gap up. I'll probably just 3D print them, I suspect, and that will make that look a lot nicer. So the floor down here, you can see here, this is basically a black rubber flooring. It's kind of what you use in wet rooms or sort of in big shower installations in, like, I don't know, changing rooms, that kind of thing. Rubber is nice because this shower pan, you can kind of barely see it here, has a pretty steep angle. It's 4 degrees angle for water runoff. And so, you know, I could have tiled it, I guess, but tile weighs a ton. You've got to have the tile, you've got to have the grout, it's a whole business. So there's black rubber flooring instead. It's nice and flexible. And then a small strip here just with some edging. This is actually edging designed for the vinyl flooring, this stuff on the real floor, but it fits around the rubber flooring pretty well as well. So that's installed there. That's just put down with construction adhesive. Then this main rubber floor is put down with even more adhesive, kind of pressed down with like lots of force and then some weights overnight and that kind of thing. It's in separate pieces, so there are separate pieces for all the walls. So there's little bits of walls here and the floor. And then I've just used some black silicone along the edges here, just to keep all of that waterproof. Now, of course, I'm very scared about how to build this stuff. So it's not the only waterproofing layer. Like when you build a traditional shower pan, right, you build like a couple of waterproofing layers in. Now, I want to do the same here. So this whole shower pan was actually built as a single unit first. So I made a couple of sort of curved sections, joined them together. It's kind of in 9 different areas, you know, the side curves and the center curve and that kind of thing. I made that, and then I cut supports that go underneath it, like kind of behind this panel here, the supports that go underneath it to hold it in place. And so at that point I had kind of this standalone shower tray. So on top of the pan, I first of all put some flashing tape, stuff you use to make roofs waterproof, at least here in the US. and then covered the entire thing with flashing tape in a pattern where the tape always overlaps down to the drain being the lowest point in that system. That stuff's pretty waterproof to start with, but over that I then painted Red Guard, which is a kind of waterproofing membrane paint thing you can find here in the US. You know, basically it's kind of like weird, like paintable rubber. It dries and forms a nice waterproof layer. And then on top of the Red Guard, then I put this rubber. And so you've got 3 different levels of waterproofing under here, and all of that waterproofing extends way up past where you're meant to fill it up. So you see here, this wall ends kind of overlaps, kind of juts out and overlaps down here. The actual wall of the shower pan goes up about another centimetre above, so above all these walls, and then all the waterproofing layers go on top of that. So in general, the idea is at any point, wherever water is in this shower, as long as it flows downhill, it'll get to the drain and it's not going to hit any kind of wood, even the plywood, let alone the MDF. So that's kind of how that's designed. It has been through a couple of test showers. It has held up pretty well so far. There's still a few points here. There's some, you know, visible bolts you can see here and some visible screws. Those are still technically not waterproof. I need to get a bit of silicone and then some screw caps on those. But otherwise, the shower is mostly working pretty well. So, you know, that's one of the 2 functions of this room. Our friend, the toilet here, of course, is the other part. So let me spin the camera around and we'll talk about the toilet very briefly. So this here is the composting toilet, and don't worry, I'm this close to it because it is completely empty right now. There's nothing in it yet. So let's talk about this briefly and how it works. Now it's all kind of like fastened in. The main idea is the composting toilet does 2 things. It separates out the liquids and the solids. So there's a little hatch here. The solids go through here. You can open and close that with a little lever. And then there's 2 holes at the front here where the liquid kind of flows down this way and then into this, we'll call it a urine bucket, that's what it is, this urine bucket at the front here. And so first of all, as you use the toilet, the urine collects in this front bucket, and then you can go and empty that as you need to, wherever. You know, don't dump it in someone's front garden, obviously, but in the backwoods, even in general, you can put that as long as it's away from your camp in most places. And then you're left with the solids. Now, the solids are much harder to dump, of course, you can't just put them anywhere. But what's in here as well as your solid waste is composting material. So I've got some coconut coir in the back, but you can choose a couple of other things too. And once you've finished with it, there's a handle over here, which you can just about spin. You can't really see it, but you spin it round. And that sort of agitates your solids and the composting material together. And the idea is it just composts. And over the course of about a week, all that human waste turns into pretty harmless compost. You shouldn't grow human edible food with it. That's the one rule they advise against. But otherwise, it's generally pretty safe to just dump in the trash, or even once it's fully composted, you can put it out in the wild on the soil normally. So that's all very nice. It has not yet been, shall we say, put into service. I've avoided this on my 2 test strips so far, just because once it's got stuff in it, you've got to basically, you know, make sure it's composting and then empty it. To empty the actual compost, the whole toilet kind of, there's screw things in the bottom. The whole toilet lifts out of the van and removes out of the shower, and then you kind of like invert it into a bag to empty it. So this whole thing is removable. The other nice part of that is if you want to, you can actually remove the whole toilet to use the full room in the shower. Though of course there is enough standing room to use a shower without removing it, and it is waterproof. You can sit on it and shower if you want to, it doesn't care. All the water will flow off of it and not go into the composting area, and then there's drain holes at the bottom to make sure it doesn't fill up with water. That's all that. You might wonder, what about the smell? Because, you know, composting human waste does still smell. There is a little, behind here, extraction fan that basically pulls a very small amount of air pressure, it makes it just negative air pressure inside here, and then sends the air through a pipe that goes out down through the bottom of the van. It exits kind of directly below the toilet here, so just forward of the Greywater tank that's underneath this particular shower. And that just runs 24/7. It uses like 10 watts. It's the tiniest, it's a tiny like computer CPU fan from what I can see. But that's just enough air pressure to keep it from smelling inside the van, because it's all, you know, the air goes in here, goes in the van, through here, out there, outside to the outside of the van, and crucially, it's outside of the van, the opposite side of where the door is. So generally the smell shouldn't come in, even if it is there. The smell is not that strong anyway. So that's the composting toilet. I will report back at some point on how well it's going, but I've heard nothing but good stories from most people who even live in their vans full time on how well this stuff works. It is, it's this or a cassette toilet, your two choices really. I've used cassette toilets, they're fine, but you do need to dump them in an RV dump station. They are always liquid waste, so it does limit your choices somewhat. So having the ability to turn things into solid waste, I think, is a big advantage in the kind of backcountry camping and traveling I want to do in the van a little bit. I'm not going to live in the van, obviously, but I plan to go away for 3 or 4 days at a time in the middle of nowhere in the Rockies or similar, and that's where you want something like this. So that's the bathroom. It's not particularly complicated. It did take a lot of time to build. Getting all these seams to line up was not great. If you look closely, which you probably can't see on the video, thankfully, they're not amazing caulking jobs on the seams. It'll do. It's waterproof. It looks somewhat passable. The whole thing's a little bit ramshackle, but that's the wonder of the van. It's kind of the, shall we say, the charm of having it homemade. And of course, you've got your visible bolts and stuff everywhere, but it's a good start. Again, this will get worked on. I may put a wall here, I may not put a wall here. I'm not entirely sure yet. That's one of the things I had to figure out once I've used it and sort of lived with it for a couple of months. Maybe, in the winter, I can sit down and have some time to rebuild some of this and improve it slowly. But yeah, that's the bathroom. It's been great. We've used the shower already. It is wonderful having a shower while I'm camping. I don't mind using the little wipes, it works pretty well, but there's something about having a nice warm shower for like 2 minutes that just makes you feel a lot more cleaner and fresh. So it's really nice. That said, I've done a lot of other stuff with the van here and there, and we've done some test trips. So let's go back out to sort of the back filming area again, and I will talk about the test trips and what I've found out and what we've changed. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've actually been on a couple of small trips with the van at this point. 2 single overnighters, I called them beta testing trips, just to see how the van is in the field and how it is to drive, and make sure nothing's shook loose, make sure all the systems work at a basic level. Generally, they went pretty well, I'd say. Everything held up, nothing really shook loose. There's a few bits and pieces inside the van that were rattling a bit, like some of the places, the wooden ceiling panels weren't secured down properly. I've popped some glue or some fasteners in most of those now, so it makes a lot less noise on the road and doesn't rattle nearly as much. And pretty much everything stayed good, like all the aluminium fastener stuff stayed nice and tight, nothing really came loose there. And there's of course a thread locker on most of them, so they shouldn't, but you want to double check these things, of course. There were a couple of small issues. I think that, let's talk about the most major one first of all, which was there's a leak. We actually had rain both of the trips I did. It's summer here in Colorado. There's a lot of summer storms. That's kind of what we get in this middle part of the year. And it tends to have like a storm pretty predictably 1 or 2 p.m. for about 3 or 4 hours. And so both trips out there, we drove up through the rain, got to the campsite, it rained for another like half an hour, and then the sun came out and it was glorious. Pretty standard here in the summer. Has been a bit of a heavy monsoon season compared to some though. And what we found was there was dripping happening down these D pillars here at the back. Now, the inside of these pillars here are hollow, and basically sort of the sheet metal of the van is arranged as like, a lot of the cabling and stuff runs through there. But what we found was these seams where the welds sort of join the 2 pieces together, water was dripping out of those seams, and it soaked these pillows and this mattress on both sides. This side was a lot worse, I would say. And so of course my first thought was, drat, Andrew, you've done the thing. You drilled 5 holes in the roof, one of them sprung a leak. I got back here after the second trip. So the first trip we thought, because we left the rear door open, which we had done that trip, and it was dripping down because the door was open. Second trip definitely wasn't, and we saw it leaking out. So I came back here on that second trip, climbed onto the roof to try and assess it. All of my holes looked really lovely and looked nice and clean and had good seals on them. However, some of the factory welds from the Ford factory on the top of these pillars where kind of the pieces all joined together, there's clearly a little bit of a hole where the factory sealant had been applied, where the water would basically roll down the roof and pool and drip inside. So I'm pretty sure that's the cause of it. I've not yet tested it outside the shop, right? I've not been to another rainstorm yet, but I went on the roof. I popped loads of silicone sealant around where those existing holes were, just on all the factory welds, and just went over all the places I thought they might break up in future to be extra sure. And then as a second sort of piece of the puzzle, I've placed more flashing tape on all these sort of open points in here on these pillars. So if we do get a leak, it at least won't go onto the soft furnishings. It will come straight down to the bottom of the D-pillars and drip out the bottom where there is a drip hole. So hopefully that two-pronged approach has stopped the leak. A leak is one of the things I was most scared of, but fingers crossed that solved it. And then what I will do at some point in future, I'm going to cover these sort of sheet metal here on the back pillars with some fabric, the same stuff I've used on the floor in the back here for the garage. So that was the worst thing. The other thing we saw was that the power headroom on the 2 batteries, it was fine, but like running the fridge in its coldest setting, because it's quite a warm part of the year right now, plus running the Starlink, which sits there, talk about that in a second, plus running a gaming laptop, which my boyfriend bought, and a few other bits and pieces, we got the batteries down from 100% to about 50% in 24 hours. There's a bit less headroom than I'd like, and also I already knew I probably didn't get a third battery, so I've now got a third battery in the battery bank next to the other two. If you've ever seen the videos of those batteries in it, you'll see there's an obvious third hole for a third battery. Guess what? Now it exists. It's wide in there with the other two. It's working great. Having an extra 50% capacity has proven really nice. On that second trip, we went, I think, to like 70% after after a day and a half. And it was still, we were doing a lot and it was perfectly fine. So that's doing well. And the solar panels are working well too. They're charging the battery back up from that 70% to full over the course of a day. So at this point, even with the fridge and the fans running, and maybe even with the Starlink running, you could just have indefinite power as long as it's in the summer when you've got enough sunlight. So that's been really good. The other thing too, let's talk about the Starlink. So like I purchased a Starlink with their RV plan. I am a sucker, it turns out, for the ability to have internet anywhere. It has worked mildly well, I'd say. 10, 15 megabits anywhere in the Rockies is a nice thing to have. Try not to use it too much, obviously, but it's good for keeping in touch, communicating, and maybe working from the road in future. A couple of interesting things with the Starlink. First of all, it's only AC power. There is no DC to DC adapter yet, so the inverter has to be on to run it. That's kind of annoying, but what will you do? The second thing is it kind of has to have a clear view of the sky. So it has a 75 feet cable that it comes with that I've tried to use and place it. It's worked pretty well. But basically, you have to run the cable from the dish to a router indoors somewhere. That one, in this case, I run it through the driver's side window and then sit it on sort of the little bit of table next to the driver's seat, just because that window is a good place to have cable ingress that is somewhat waterproof. I need to figure out a way to maybe have a port I can plug it into, but it's a weird connector. It's like a weird mini HDMI reuse. So these are all problems from another time, but it has worked pretty well. You've also seen here, one of the things I made a big point about when I built the van was having this as a giant open space. I have actually added this leg right back here. You can just about see it on the video. That leg is not there for structural reasons, though of course it helps. It is there to provide a nice little place to stash these two chairs and the Starlink case off to one side. So they are much more vertical than they would be, so the storage back here is better. In general, one thing I'll do over the course of the months and the years is probably add more aluminium framing in here to give some structure so I can store things more efficiently and make use of the full vertical height of this garage, because it's quite tall and it's hard to put stuff up here without that kind of framing. On the left here, you can see, I built up around the propane tank. There's now a nice shelf here, and then stuff slides in and out of it pretty easily. So that's been a nice use of that space as well. So that's kind of the main changes back here in the garage. A few other changes indoors. I added some hangers and hooks and stuff for the kitchen, though I talked about some of that stuff in the last video as well. But in general, it has been pretty good. The only real thing I've done since the last trip, the major addition, has been I've added the sliding drawer above the fridge in the kitchen finally, so that's in there. And it even works kind of well. It doesn't bind too much, which is shocking given how bad I am at cabinetry, as I mentioned last time. But yeah, it's been working pretty well, apart from the leaks and that kind of stuff. So my goal is, next trip I think is to another normal National Forest campsite like the first two. And after that will be its first trip to an actual backcountry trip in the middle of nowhere in the National Forest with no facilities around. So this will be its first full test of what do you like away from everything, and you have to rely on the toilet and stuff and all that stuff, and there's no water supply around. So I'm going to work up to it slowly, but you know, I'm pretty happy right now. Like, it has been nice doing trips in it. It's really comfortable. Like, this bed especially is maybe one of the comfiest beds I've slept in, including in houses. It's not quite as good as my one at home, but it's really close to being as good as that one. So it has honestly been a really good time. And yeah, and with that, that's kind of the end of this series of build videos. You know, you've seen the progress of the van from completely bare husk to what I call a good version 1.0. Is it finished? No, it's never going to be finished. That's always been my point in this project, right? I know it won't be finished, but it's now in a really good place. I can use it. It has significantly improved my camping experience in the ways I wanted it to. It's lazier than tents, I'm not going to lie. Tents are fun as well, but the ability to just go somewhere and not care about rain and pack up quickly and stuff has been really good. So that's kind of been the van. And yeah, what's coming up with it? Well, lots of trips, lots of test trips. Video-wise, this is the last main build video, but I will be doing kind of a sort of walkthrough discussion of the entire van, all of its features in a single video, just because some folks, and I totally get this, don't want to listen to me droning on for hours and hours in these build videos and just want a nice quick, here's what happens in 10 minutes or so. So I'll be doing one of those and also get some footage of it out in the wild rather than just here in the workshop, as it has been for most of the last 8 months. Just lived its life in this somewhat dark but still quite nice interior. You know, it's been good and it's got its nice plug into the wall at all times. So yeah, that's the van. I hope you've enjoyed these videos. If you've gone through all of them, thank you very much. I know I do tend to talk a lot. That's the way of these things, but I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found something useful about it. If you're thinking about building your own van, I have 2 pieces of advice. One, it takes way longer than you think. Like, I went into this thing thinking it would take ages. Still took way longer than I thought it would take. But 2, it's worth it. I might say, like, take an existing conversion or van and modifying it is probably easier as a good start. Going from 0 to 100 like this is probably the most work you can put on yourself. It's not for the faint of heart. And if I had had the time and the money extra, I may have got a professional, but I think everyone who knew me knew that, like, this project, like being able to do this, that was always part of it, or half of it, right? Like, I didn't just want the van, I wanted the project of building the van as well. So if that's your thing, if you're embarking on one or even maintaining or fixing one up or even doing small fixes, good luck. It's not as hard as it seems, you learn as you go. And the key thing is to understand that you are never really done. Iteration and slow improvements, I think, are the way to go with it. So with that, I'm gonna go off, I'm gonna pack all this up, go and edit this last build video, and then in, I think, 3 days from when I'm filming right now, I'm off to the next camp, and hopefully there'll be no leaks. So I hope you're doing well out there, and I will see you next time.